a track record of lifting the very least well-off in society out of poverty. Over 68 million people have been lifted out of poverty over the past 5 years. That's an average of 37,000 people every day. There are still over 30 million people, however, living in extreme poverty, but China has vowed to lift them all out by 2020. On Monday, Chinese Premier Li Keqiang pledged that China would reduce that number by over 10 million this year. Now, with the clock clicking and the remaining poor often the hardest to raise up, what are the bigger challenges? How has China been able to make such a difference, and what more awaits? Welcome to a special edition of The Point with me, Li Xin, and joining me are Professor Zheng Xinye, Associate Dean of the School of Economics and Chair of the Energy Economics Department of Renmin University of China, and from Chengdu in southwest China's Sichuan Province, CGTN reporter Tao Yuan. Before we start the discussion, let's review some parts of a special program we did last year on extreme poverty eradication.
I was raised in a small village in Hunan province in the 1970s. When I was a child, the village was very poor, without electricity, no tap water, no fancy toys. My most favorite toys are grasshoppers, hens, chickens, and ducks. When I went to the college, the villagers of my village all held my hand and said, "Now you are going to the city. You are going to be the star of our family and the hope of our village. And as for us, we are farmers without culture. Therefore, there is no future for us." Do farmers have no culture, and does the countryside have no future? This question pestered me many years, and I gave it a second thought in the year 2003, when my beloved grandmother passed away in the village, and I went back to her 7-day traditional funeral. According to the local custom, all the villagers of my village should come to my home to have dinner for 7 days. And there were a lot of rituals, drama playing, sutra chanting, traditional games. To my astonishment, I realized that everything went on so smoothly, just like a very modern and highly organized company. Everybody was right in the right place and helping each other, and there was no written document, no long meetings. So I realized solidarity and community help is of great importance and part and parcel of rural culture. Later on, I became a cultural volunteer, and I brought many volunteers to different parts of Chinese villages. And wherever we go, we found that community help and solidarity is a very important part of rural culture, but it's often overlooked and underestimated. For thousands of years, Chinese villagers have lived together, worked together, and helped each other in times of need, no matter it's for disaster prevention or for helping each other in children raising or education. And this explains why coming together and well-motivated people can create miracles. In the 1960s, Chinese farmers created by their hands 80,000 reservoirs across China, the largest irrigation system of the world. And in the last 3 decades, apart from the policies and infrastructure, Chinese villagers helped each other for elevating poverty. Apart from solidarity, Chinese villagers are also very smart and creative and very talented. During the years, we met with many farmers with great talent. Some of them are great chefs, great dancers, great singers, and great experts on animals and trees. So rural culture can actually become a treasure instead of just a burden. So do farmers have culture, and does the countryside have a future? My answer is yes. Poverty alleviation is not a one-way philanthropy. It's a two-way mutual learning process. The city should learn from the countryside, and the countryside should learn from the city. I hope in the future people can join hands and to vitalize the rural area again and make it the most beautiful, livable, and cultural place to be. Thank you.
I think it's such a wonderful topic, and so beautifully put there, because it is so important. And I'm going to ask this to you, Mr. Garachi. What can we learn from that divide between the rural and the urban areas?
Well, it's an interesting topic. I am also the author of a documentary on China's rural economy. This is not self-advertising, but it's actually to let people know that China obviously has a lot of heritage in the rural areas. What we're looking at was, for example, how the income disparity between the rural areas and the urban area was at the same time a problem, that we do not want to have income disparity, but on the other hand, a pull factor. The higher the income disparity, the more the average farmer had an incentive to leave and improve his wealth by living into the city and moving from the agriculture to the manufacturing or service sector in the city. So we also have this philosophical in a way, debate. What is the optimum level the income disparity should have between urban and rural areas? At the moment in China is about 2.8 times, 3 times. So the average rural person makes 12,000 renminbi per year. The average urban citizen makes 36,000 renminbi per year, 3 times. And we don't know yet what is the optimum level that a society can support in terms of making the agriculture and the rural economy self-sustained. At the moment, we don't have that yet. So we expect, for example, a larger flow of migrants still coming to the urban areas, 18, 20 million per year. And that depletion actually makes the average income for those who are left grow faster.
Mm-hmm. I think there's also an interesting shift of concept of people's impression of the countryside, right? As Jessica was talking about, when people talk about farmers, their impression is more or less negative, and that's why a lot of people kind of look down upon the farmers. How important is it for people to change their mindset and thinking rural areas doesn't equal backwardness?
Well, that used to be the case, right? The myth of this modernization paradigm is somehow, as we move towards more material wealth, modern style, everybody get urbanized. That's how people in North America, in Europe, in Japan have done. They all move into the urban centers because rural areas are backward. The story just told us. Now China happened to be just over half of its population of nearly 1.4 billion urbanized. A long way to go if they want to urbanize the rest. What we're seeing now is a trend saying with the new technology, with the communication technology, with the internet, with the e-commerce, that people can actually appreciate their rural culture, their rural economy. They can use e-commerce to promote what they produce in rural areas and make rural areas catching up with the urban areas as much enjoying a modern lifestyle. I think these are paradigm shifts and they're new trends we should pay attention to. No country has a monopoly on how this all is going to develop. But I think that's where the promise is. We're a little sometimes gloomy looking at the numbers, highest infant mortality rate, lowest life expectancy in Africa, in South Asia. But these are also areas may enjoy a new rural economy of some sort we're yet to figure out.
Right, interesting discussion we had there last year. So a couple of months later, where are we and what are the new topics in point? And we cross over now to Tao Yuan, our reporter, who has just come back from reporting on a very important project to connect isolated people separated by a valley, and people have been hampered to prosper because of that. So Tao Yuan, from what you have seen covering that story, what can you tell us? Why has it been so difficult to people been lifted out of poverty? And now that infrastructure project is being put into place, what kind of difference is that making?
Hello, Liu Xin. Well, there's a saying in China that goes, if you want to get rich, then build roads, right? Everybody in China knows that saying. But the hard truth in southwest China, where I'm based, so in places like Sichuan Province, Yunnan, and Guizhou, is that the geography is just too harsh, and therefore it's difficult and expensive to build roads, bridges, and other infrastructure. So what leads to poverty here in this region? Well, I think a big culprit is isolation. Now, many of these villages are actually located deep into the mountains, cut off from the rest of the world, and basically left behind by China's fast-paced growth. So take Liangshan, for example, you just mentioned. I went there during a recent reporting trip. It's a prefecture in Sichuan Province. It's an ethnic E minority region and one of the poorest in China. So many villages there hang on steep cliff sides, and villagers basically have to climb. And this may sound ridiculous, climb up and down a ladder to just go up and down the cliff to go in and out of their homes. So people cross rivers and canyons through a precarious ropeway hanging mid-air. And that's why we hear about children drowning on their way to school, people losing their footing and falling off the cliffs. It doesn't happen often, to be fair, but it happens. And 1,600 villages in Liangshan are located in non-arable areas. Let me emphasize that number, 1,600 villages in Liangshan alone. That's one prefecture in one province. So you can imagine why building roads or relocating these people all at once is just too expensive, at least, to happen instantly.
Right. Professor Zheng, what can you make of the situation that Tao Yuan has just described? What it say about some of the deep pockets of extreme poverty China is determined to eradicate?
Yeah, I think this is a very important issue, and right now, from people's understanding that the jobs is one of the most important way to make people out of poverty. But to make jobs work, you need there's industries, firms located where people can live in. Also, infrastructure, as you mentioned earlier, is also very important. So I think in the coming future, we need to let people out of their place and find jobs in cities, and also to make the infrastructure more productive, also to make the education works, that the people has better or higher productivity.
Right. As Tao Yuan mentioned, Liangshan is the largest minority group of the E ethnic group, and according to Premier Li, much of this year's effort will be focused on regions with significant minority populations, such as the Tibet Autonomous Region, in the Xinjiang Uyghur Autonomous Region, and parts of southwest China's Yunnan Province and Gansu Province in northwest China, all of which have struggled with poverty for decades. Why do these minority groups, Professor Zheng, still have such a poverty problem, and what special circumstances do they face?
I think the major reason is that this area is far away from the China's most productive area, and if they produce something or some goods or service, it's very difficult for them move their products to the market. So that's the one of the most important reasons.
Are there special efforts? Are there special efforts put in place to help these people come out of poverty from the central government and different various levels of governments?
I think there's two perspectives. One is that they let the market work, let the people move out their villages to the cities, to the other place can find the jobs. That's one way we call it the market works. As a lot of ways, the government, I think the Chinese central government and the local governments spend huge money and a lot of efforts to help these people. For example, recently they spend huge money for infrastructure. Also, recently they visualize a lot of very innovative projects. For example, they say let the poor people to build their solar cells on their roof, so then people can sell their electricity to the network. That's one way the central government, I think it's very innovative.
Right.
At one way we can let the people get more money, and also we can contribute to the power generation, which will be used for city. It's also good for climate change.
Right. Tao Yuan, from your experience covering stories in those minority areas, what have you seen? Are there anything different from the minority areas and the people from minority ethnic groups suffering from poverty and those which belong to the majority Han people?
I think Professor Zheng mentioned something that sounded very interesting to me. Is the government coming up with innovative ways to help these people in ethnic minority regions to combat poverty. But what I experience personally, I do feel that education is a very important part of it, because when you travel to a lot of these places, you'll realize that a lot of the people, not just the elderly people, but also small children, they don't speak the Han language, which is the ethnic majority, the standard Mandarin language in China. So if they can't speak the language, how do they go out of their mountains and find ways to provide for themselves? And the hard truth is that in China's villages, there's no official estimation, but various estimations put that 2 out of 3 children in China's remote villages drop out of school before grade 12. So if you think about that, they come to the cities, they haven't fully mastered the Han language yet. They can only do very lowly manual jobs to provide a living for themselves. So they will never be able to move up the social economic ladder and fully integrate into city life.
But Tao Yuan, from your observation, have you seen efforts, have you seen actions being taken by governments at different levels to help these people learn the Mandarin besides their ethnic group language, so that they can have a better job opportunity in the future?
Definitely, we're seeing those kind of efforts. When you travel to the poorest regions, again, in places in Yunnan, Sichuan, Guizhou, these are the most backward places in China. You're in the middle of a village, and you see this very modern school right in the middle of that village, and government making policies to encourage teachers to go to these places and teach those kids. So these efforts are actually all quite impressive. But then again, Liu Xin, you have to remember that a lot of these villages are in inhospitable areas. So some of the places we go to are not even reachable by car. So you basically have to, especially when it snows or when the weather is bad, you basically have to stop your car at the mountain foot and travel the final distances on your foot. So you know, under this kind of circumstances, it's really hard to attract high-quality teachers to go to these places and engage in educational efforts in these places.
Right.
So
Professor,
I think it's very important to not look at the issue
separately.
Sorry, go ahead.
Sure. Professor Zheng, what does that say about the kind of compounded challenges that China is facing to eradicate extreme poverty? You also have to, as I said, lift the level of education without which poverty will come back in the future.
Actually, I agree with Tao. I think education is very important. Actually, it's very important factor for poverty reduction. But right now, we have a kind of a very difficult position, because the education level is low. Those people cannot find a job in cities. But because they cannot find a jobs in cities, the education return is also low. So kind of,
a vicious cycle going around. What is the solution? Does the Chinese central government has at least in theory, a solution to that? What is that?
One way is that to make the education very cheap or free, so lower the parents' cost. Because for parents, if they stay at the university, at the school, they got nothing. They got something in the future. If they send their kids to the market, they get some money.
Right.
So the one way is that to make the education free. Another way is that as Tao mentioned, the central government utilizes some programs for the remote area, for those we call teaching points. There's several, or 5 or 10 students there, or there's several, 3 or 4 teachers there. So this is very small. Teaching points,
but not schools.
Not schools.
Not schools.
It's not good. It's not a perfect solution.
Sure.
But still, it's a solution. It's better, much better than they say we let these kids out of their leave their villages, living in the city. It's very expensive way for their parents.
Indeed, a lot of details to
so
take care
this kind of also, I think this, but it takes time to solve this kind of problems.
Okay, we'll take a very short break, and you have been watching The Point with me, Li Xin. We'll be back right after this. Stay with CGTN. Welcome back. Tao Yuan, let me come to you again. It's fascinating what you have experienced, and I want to hear more. We have been talking about this targeted poverty alleviation, and you have covered stories on that. What kind of challenges is this approach faced with at this moment as we go into the last mile, people say, in eradicating extreme poverty in China?
Well, Liu Xin, it's very important that you mentioned the last mile. It's not just the last mile. People also call it the last and toughest mile, because at this stage of poverty alleviation, those who are still trapped in poverty are trapped deep. So it's very hard to help them lift themselves out of poverty. So what the government means by targeted poverty alleviation effort is to craft personalized poverty alleviation measures aimed at helping individuals stuck in various kinds of situations. Health, for example, I think the number is 46%. 46% of the people in China's rural impoverished regions are poor because of health issues. So the government right now is incorporating these rural families into a public medical insurance scheme called the New Rural Cooperative Medical Scheme. But the problem with that is that a lot of the medicines that these patients take, or a lot of the treatment that they go through, are not necessarily covered under that insurance plan. So how do you help people with these conditions? And that's, again, what the government means by the toughest mile. It's personalized measures aiming at helping these people who are deeply entrenched in poverty.
Well, don't forget, we still have 30 million people, so a lot of cases individually to tackle. Professor Zheng, how do you look at the importance of providing basic medical care to these impoverished people, and as fast as possible, so that once they are lifted out of poverty, they don't slip back because of a major illness?
I think this is also very important factor for for poverty reduction, because a lot of people they are poor because they got medical problems. So the Chinese government initialized several years ago, initialized we call this medical schemes, right?
Right.
These schemes. I think this is very important based on my own research, and this is not a perfect solution, again.
No, but as I said, this is called a Rural Cooperative Medical Scheme, RCMS, and that covers 800 million rural dwellers. That is 98% of the total rural population. It's amazing. I mean, in many developed countries, this is very difficult, right, to give people such a high percentage of medical coverage of medical care. How was China able to do that, Professor Zheng?
This is kind of problem even very difficult for developed countries.
Of course.
So I think here's the way they are making this happen. First, the poor household or people in rural area, they contribute half of this, the fund. Then the central government contribute about 30%, then the local government contribute the rest of the about 20%. So there's some variation across the different areas, but mainly the individuals, the central governments and local governments contribute the funds. And this kind of medical schemes usually suffers two problems. One is we call this moral hazard. Another is
one is what? Sorry.
Moral hazard. If you got insurance covered, you may not very careful about the eating, your working conditions, so it's easier for you to get sick. Another issue is that maybe you go better hospital, you take more medicines, unnecessary checks or medicines. That's what we call this under insurance. People have an incentive to do something unnecessary. So we call this moral hazard. Another way is say the adverse selection. So if you have such a insurance, so people who healthy people, they may not join this program. So those people who join this program, it's very easier for them to get sick. So these two problems usually make this kind of insurance program not working. So the Chinese government use very, again, innovative way. One is, you say, the household joins So if the parents join this program, the young, healthy family members also need to be the whole program. So that's the reason this program almost cover all the rural area.
Right. A lot of technical stuff there. Tao Yuan, from your experience covering these stories, do you think such scheme has been successful in at least giving people the kind of assurance, feeling of assurance necessary to start helping themselves, maybe?
Well, Liu Xin, I really do want to be optimistic, and I do acknowledge that the government is doing everything they can to help these people through these targeted poverty alleviation. But the thing is that I've seen way too many cases where people's lives basically get ruined by illnesses. So I do feel that more efforts need to be done. For example, I've seen small children with leukemia or cancer. Their parents have basically given up on their children because they simply cannot afford the medical bills.
But
sometimes their grandparents take over because...
Right. Why has this been the case, for instance, for the parents? Have they not been covered by the scheme that we were talking about, or has the government measure yet to reach those areas?
Well, several reasons, Liu Xin. Like I mentioned before, a lot of the medicines, foreign medicine, imported medicine, for example, are not covered under the Rural Cooperative Medical Scheme. And another reason is that local level hospitals are usually not very high quality, and so are not well equipped and manned to treat severe illnesses. So when people develop severe illnesses, oftentimes they have to travel to the cities, big cities, to big hospitals. The problem with that is that once you go outside of your region, then the percentage at which your medical bills get covered reduces significantly. So soon enough, the medical bills become a huge burden on the family, and that's why families have to make tough financial choices over, the lives of their children, basically.
That's really tragic and shows the kind of challenges the Chinese government is faced with when they want to win the battle over extreme poverty in the next year or 2 years. We have to leave it there. Many thanks to my two guests, Professor Zheng Xinye, Associate Dean of the School of Economics and Chair of the Energy Economics Department of Renmin University, and CGTN reporter Tao Yuan. A quick point here, never in human history has poor people been helped on such a massive scale and in such a short period of time. Still 68 million people in 5 years, that's more than the entire population of the UK. There are problems, as we have seen, as we have heard in this program, such as the ones that Tao Yuan mentioned. But I think the determination and the confidence is there on the part of the central government to really meet the goal of eradicating extreme poverty in China by 2020 and keep extreme poverty at bay in the future. A lot of work still ahead, and we'll keep an eye on the situation. That is it for this edition of The Point with me, Liu Xin. Follow me on Facebook and Twitter using the handle The Point with Alex. Download the application called CGTN to watch our show on your mobile devices, or go to YouTube and look for CGTN The Point. Thanks for watching. You've got The Point.